Hey guys, well, good morning. Welcome to the October 2004 Leadership Live. And today we have a good one. We have our special guest, Dr. Fubara, who's been with us for, I would say, for as longer as I've been here. So since Rosewood or the Pro, I think it was Rosewood Pro V, Rosewood Academy is what it's called now. It was used to be called Pro VU. So it's going to be a good one to kind of kick off and get started with. We always go with our why, and our why is to multiply the blessings and opportunities that have been placed to our trust. And then we'll move on to the themes this year, which we finished 3, and we're starting the 4th one this year, or this quarter. So professional growth, we wrapped up in Q1, building high performance teams, which wrapped up in Q2. And then we just wrapped up Q3, which is overcoming challenges. And those videos, you're able to watch them on YouTube. They're uploaded as well as they're on our newsletter that we send out, kind of recapping the Leadership Lives, and we'll have the links in there as well. And if you go to the Rosewood YouTube page, you can look up to the playlist. So if you guys watch those, I know Taylor went out this morning and passed out pins for those who earned the Q3. So moving on to Q4, nurturing workplace culture. And like I said, Dr. Edward Farrell will come in and speak on inclusive leadership. So floor is yours, Dr. Edward Fubara.
Thank you, Antonio. I appreciate it. The introduction. You call me a special guest. That feels weird. I've been around.
You're always a special guest.
Oh, thank you. So good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure always to join Leadership Live and to speak with the folks from Rosewood. And thank you for having me and for the continued relationship with the Campbell School of Business. So we don't take it for granted, and again, we do appreciate it. So let's jump into the topic of inclusive leadership. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we'll start with a definition of sorts, and so we'll talk. You'll hear me talk about inclusive leadership and a culture of inclusion, both, because we're talking about the reason behind inclusive leadership, or the goal of inclusive leadership, is to create a culture of inclusion. So again, you'll hear me talk about both things. So as it says here, when we talk about a culture of inclusion, we think about an organizational environment that allows people with multiple backgrounds, mindsets, and ways of thinking to work effectively together and to perform to their highest potential in order to achieve organizational objectives based on sound principles. And I think that's a nice definition of what we would like to accomplish. And so take a closer look at that definition. We're trying to create a place where people with multiple backgrounds, mindsets, and ways of thinking can work effectively together. And so I think that's fairly self-explanatory. Everybody in the organization, regardless of where they're coming from, should be able to bring their whole selves to the table. And again, for the purposes of accomplishing the organization's objectives. And I think everybody benefits. It's kind of a win-win-win situation. Our customers benefit. We as employees benefit when we're able to give our best and to do good work, and to, we all experience a sense of fulfillment when we're able to do good work. And then, of course, the organization benefits as well. So as I said, it's a win-win-win when everybody can work together in a pleasant, supportive environment and accomplish organizational objectives. So that's what we're trying to, sorry.
I'll jump in a little bit. So Antonio didn't give me an intro, but Dr. Fubara and I are going to tag team a little bit. I'm not a special guest, but Dr. Fubara has actually been on this as long as I have. So he's been on every one of them. So, this topic, we'll work through it. Certainly it brings up some controversy in the current climate, but to Dr. Fubara's point, this definition, if you talk about culture and you have people that aren't included in the culture, you don't have culture. Like it's kind of that basic. It's, if it's the Rosewood culture and the cultures within our companies and people aren't part of that culture, it's kind of obvious. And so I think what we're seeing here and what we're going to talk through is everyone brings different perspectives, different backgrounds, different beliefs. to the organization. And so we want a cohesive culture that acknowledges that and brings everyone together. And so I think it's a good definition to kick that off. So Dr. Fubara and I bounce back and forth a little bit as we walk through this one. So
thank you, Chandler. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. I think this is where, yeah, so here, this is where I thought you were going to start. This is the values of the organization, Rosewood's values. And let me say this, I'm not trying to flatter you all, but it's really impressive to see an organization where values are central. And so again, I hope that those of you who work for Rosewood recognize that this is not something you see everywhere. That working for an organization that's value driven is special. It's somewhat unique, and it's an opportunity, I think, because again, it's more than just making money. Which I tell my students, making money is critical. So please don't demonize making money. But yeah, this is an organization where the values are more important than the money, and I appreciate that about Rosewood. And of course, as we talk about inclusion, it really connects directly back to these values.
And for those of you who hear Dr. Fubara and might roll your eyes or in your head think, yeah, right, I hope you recognize the reason we keep coming back to it, and the reason that we have Dr. Fubara and these people, that he brings on guest speakers, is to continue to show that they are our aspirational values. We put them up there to try to rededicate and recommit to them, and certainly we don't meet that standard all the time. And this is an area that, I think that we value very highly. And so I want to walk through these values kind of one by one and let Dr. Fubara give you some of the research on inclusion and where it applies. But, I do want this to be an interactive discussion, because the culture and the way we live out the values, we've covered them a lot in our morning blend, and we've had some groups that are going back and reviewing the definitions we have around them. What you pour into the values and how you communicate and talk with us guides how well we live them out and how well our culture is. And so if you don't speak up and you don't participate, we kind of go with blinders on in our version, and we're not the ones in the field. We don't always have the same perspective, which is the point of this topic. So do the right thing. Somebody want to stab at where inclusion arrives? The definition's right under it. So
I think Chandler, I think when it comes to do the right thing, it's where inclusion really starts, right? Because you're doing what is right, not what is good for you personally or your group or even your organization in many regards, right? It's that greater good, the universal nature of good and doing the right thing. And so I think it's really the foundational bedrock of what we talk about inclusion, because you've got to see things from everyone's perspective versus just your own.
Certainly good, Scott. And I would also point to the last part of that sentence is transparent accountability. So when we do break off into the groups, or we have the discussions, or we have meetings even within your company or department, transparency is also letting us know where we're failing to meet to do the right thing, and then us owning it, finding ways that are, one, we're capitalists, so it's got to be profitable, and it's got to move towards, no money, no mission is one of the comments one group says. So if you don't have money, you don't have much of a mission. But transparent accountability is, hey, we could have handled this differently. We didn't receive all the perspectives and move forward. How about spirit of excellence? Someone else? Or Dr. Fubara, we'll let you jump in on one if you want.
Well, it's ironic that the first one is doing the right thing. I did a presentation years ago called "Do the Right Thing." I kind of riffed on Spike Lee's movie "Do the Right Thing," which is actually about inclusion, in a very artistic and not a business context. And Spike Lee is a unique individual, but That's I just recognize that connection there. But yeah, a spirit of excellence is about, again, I'm an outsider speaking to this, but it's about doing things the right way, serving customers, treating people the way they want to be treated. I'm not reading the definition here, but I think that means that everybody has to be treated the way you would want to be treated. There are no exceptions. There's no out group, so to speak. But everybody is valued as part of that spirit.
Yeah, and I would add a general standpoint of that before I let you on there, Scott, is that when we're trying to deliver anything, if that's recruiting, the way we onboard, the way marketing puts its message out, and you want to deliver excellence, to me, it's kind of obvious you need to consider think of a prism or a diamond. You need to consider all the different ways people view that problem. And if you're not bringing other people who have a different background than you and a different history than you and a different perspective, then to me, it's kind of ignorant. You are either not smart enough to realize you don't see one piece of that prism, or potentially you don't want the work of someone bringing up something new, which happens a lot, intellectual laziness. Or, there's just a lot of reasons people do it. I don't find it very compelling, is that, certainly time, we got to acknowledge it is business. So there's only so many perspectives you can bring in because time dictates how fast decisions and things have to move. But if there's different facets to look at a problem and you don't take them into account, can you honestly say that you tried to produce something excellent? It's a real question. And then, of course, the last part of that sentence is treat others with respect. And all we ask is to do the best they can every day, working with purpose, and treat others with respect. And so I think that kind of encompasses it. Scott, I stepped on you.
Yeah, no worries. I was just going to bring up 2 points. I was with a client yesterday, and what they had, their values aligned very much like ours. And one of the values they had was do what it takes, along with doing the right thing. And it kind of resonated a little bit when I looked at spirit of excellence, right? Are we actually doing what it takes by seeing those different facets to deliver the best experience for our teammates and for our clients? Great book out right now, very popular, called Unreasonable Hospitality, written by Will Guidara. And it's all about going above and beyond expectation because you're living that spirit of excellence. And I promise I won't go to all comment on every one.
We before me. Someone else jump in other than the trio so far.
I can take this one. So on this one, I relate to it a lot, and especially how I look at it, because I grew up with a big family. I grew up playing sports, so I've always kind of been installed in me to know there's no I in team, and then kind of just knowing working together for that same goal and that same mission, you guys can get there a lot easier than trying to go separate and trying to kind of not include everybody else. Especially with a team, you have different sets of people, different experiences, different things they bring to the table, and kind of getting a chance to see what everybody can do, especially if you have weaknesses, that a lot of those people on your team have those strengths that are your weaknesses and kind of help you balance everything out.
Very good. Anyone else want to take a cue off of the sentence afterwards and give some thoughts? Trying to leave breadcrumbs. The difference in collaboration and cooperation is maybe an area.
Yeah. I was going to say, working together with collaboration, cooperation almost is just like essential to having inclusivity. If you're not being inclusive, then there's no way you're actually being collaborative and cooperative. So I think that definition for we before me is essential for inclusion, and even diversity, right? I mean, you got if you're collaborating, you would think that there's multiple different thoughts, opinions, perspectives in that regard as well.
Good. Grace to generosity.
Hey, Chandler, I'll speak up on this one real quick because I gave a shout out to one of our installers this past week. We had an installer out of Houston, Texas, working up in Austin, and on his second day to the job, he hit a deer on the side of on the road on the freeway. So he was kind of stranded for a little bit. Well, we spoke with one of our newer installers out of Houston that had been training along with this installer, and he volunteered to drive up to Austin, pick the guy up off the side of the road, and go take him and finish his job. So, I put a little shout out email to the coordinating team and so forth. But yeah, and it was, grace through generosity. The positivity in impacting our employees and greater community through servant leadership and selfless giving. And I just thought that was a great example of that.
It is. Thank you very much, Brian. Innovate to elevate. We've given you a lot. Go ahead, Dr. Fubara.
Let me interrupt for just a second there, because I have to say that we are beneficiaries of the selfless giving part. So you guys probably wouldn't blow your own horn there, but again, not to be flattering, but we appreciate it. And I know that we're not the only ones that Rosewood gives to. And both Chandler and Scott and Matt, when he was at Rosewood, have all been guest speakers in our classes, and that's the servant leadership part and the giving of their time, and of course giving financially as well to support us. So it's not just words. There's action behind it.
I appreciate that. Innovate to elevate kind of goes back to some other comments we had on if you want to be innovative, what's the best way to do it?
Include lots of people's opinions and thoughts.
Right. And be willing to have your thoughts challenged, and have your thoughts beat around, and your perspective, potentially not seeing the answer or potential solutions out there, because even the most well-intentioned person, only knows what they know, and they only know from their history and their experience and their education and their background. And so if you're not going to take others into account and include them in the collaboration we spoke about earlier, you may have innovation, but is it the best possible? Is it the excellence we're shooting for? And I think that's an area it goes with. So we'll move it along. Dr. Fubara's got some slides that will certainly harken back to these values to discuss as we move through the presentation, and I'll let you take it.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for the input there. Antonio, let's go to the next slide, please. So a couple of questions. As we talk about inclusive leadership, you could ask yourself these questions. You could ask your people these questions. So some of you are formal leaders, your supervisors or bosses, managers of some kind. Others of you are informal leaders, so you may not have the title of leader, but hopefully you are doing leadership indirectly or informally in whatever role that you're in. And so these are questions that help to measure inclusive leadership. So the first one: do people feel they belong within the organization or their team? Does everybody feel like they belong, like they're a part of the organization, like they're part of the in-group, so to speak? And then secondly, do people experience fair and equal career opportunities regardless of the unique and different skills and competencies they contribute? And I think you can look at these questions kind of two ways. One is, from the outside in, especially that second question. So as a leader, am I providing equal career opportunities for everyone? Are we taking advantage of everyone's skills and perspectives and competencies? And I think also we want to ask, do the people themselves feel like that's true? So perception is important. And so again, we want to ask these questions. In some cases, we may want to ask them explicitly. So we may want to have, as part of a performance discussion, as part of a employee satisfaction discussion, or a employee feedback session, to ask people how they feel about whether they belong in this organization, and what could make it better, what could change to improve the extent to which you feel like you're part of the club, so to speak. Obviously that's going to change. That's important. It's going to impact things like organizational commitment and turnover. So we definitely want everyone to feel like they belong, like they're part of the family. And sometimes when people talk about organizations as family, it's a little bit of a cliche, but I think it's an appropriate term to use to bring people in. So, any feedback on this one, or I'll keep going?
Hey, Dr. Fubara, I'll add something to that real quick. As far as experiencing fair, equal career opportunities, I think going back to our core values and grace through generosity, a lot of times people think that's just giving of money or charitable donations and things like that. But one of the ways at Rosewood that I've personally experienced and seen through, many of the things over the last 5 years is, we're very we show a lot of grace through generosity through the career opportunities that we have provided for people, myself included. I mean, just the people on this call, Kelly Beard, Karen, Gabby, Antonio, all these people have grown within our organization and been given opportunities to advance their skill sets, advance their careers, advance their income, and all that's done through the inclusiveness of how we kind of operate within this building. So for someone like myself who's been promoted multiple times within Rosewood, I think that's important to recognize, not only from a cultural perspective, but from an opportunities perspective. And, when organizations are giving people opportunities to grow and develop themselves and take on leadership roles within the organization, I think that's a really healthy sign of inclusivity. It's a healthy sign of a strong culture. And I think something that a lot of people on this call who've experienced that firsthand can speak to. And just think it's a good tie back to our core values on this particular point.
Yeah, thank you. And I like the way you said that people have been given opportunities to lead, and so there's a difference there between given the opportunity and given the role. So you have to earn the role, you have to earn the promotions, but do you get the opportunity to try? Do you get the opportunity to demonstrate your ability to the opportunity to earn, basically, to earn the role, and I think that's important. Thank you. Anybody else on this one? All right, let's keep going. And as I said, we want to make sure that people, back up a little bit, Antonio. Let me add one little thing here, which is, again, we should be asking people if this is their perception, and so we know what the organization's intentions are, which is to provide these opportunities and to make sure that the opportunities are available to everyone. And so if somebody feels like they are not receiving these opportunities, they should be able to speak up. They should be able to ask questions in a collegial sort of professional environment and find out, why they don't feel that way. And maybe, because it may be a small, sort of nuance in communication, or somebody just didn't know about something. And so, again, we want to make sure that people recognize the opportunities that are there. So,
yeah, on that point, there's an area I use fairly often now at HelmWise, but certainly more in the project management role, that I think is, are you a stone thrower or a stone mason? Meaning you can pick that same stone up that we failed at and say, hey, if we just did this better, or here's areas we can improve, versus you fell, you're terrible. We get that a lot in project management, and so we get that a lot with clients. So I just bring it up in this context too, because again, that's the point earlier I made on the values. And if you're rolling your eyes, we need to come up with a better way to get your feedback. But are you giving feedback to fix it, or giving feedback to tear it down? And there's a huge difference in those two things. Do you want to create the best culture that produces excellence, that lives up to the values, or do you just want to point out all the ways it doesn't and it fails? There's two different approaches completely, and I think that it's on us to continue to build and foster a way to have folks feel comfortable doing that. So thanks for that. All right, Antonio.
Thank you. All right. So oftentimes we hear the terms diversity and inclusion. Somebody earlier used the word diversity. And so the two concepts generally go together or are discussed together, you might say, but they're not the same thing. And I think it's important to point out the distinction. Inclusion is what we're really after. So as it mentions here on the slide, diversity without inclusion is counterproductive. So bringing a bunch of people together from different backgrounds, but there are many organizations where not everyone has a voice. And so that's diversity without inclusion. Verna Myers is credited with the metaphor that diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so once again, it's full participation. It's leveraging your background, your skills, your abilities, and not just counting the numbers, which is sort of the old school approach. I studied affirmative action and equal employment opportunity for my doctoral dissertation, and some of that old school approach was kind of about the numbers. And an organization would say, yeah, we're a diverse organization, just look, here are the numbers. And it would often result in unfair treatment or preferential hiring practices and so on that were really didn't benefit anyone, to be honest. And so again, diversity is important, but it's not the end that we're striving toward. On the last slide, or the last point, there's a study show that without shared work to produce something together, especially it's a struggle, cohesion does not occur. Especially that should say especially if it's a struggle. It does say if it's a struggle, excuse me. So in other words, people working together, working on difficult projects, working through obstacles, and overcoming challenges together creates a shared sense of mission, a shared camaraderie, a shared commitment to the work. And so, again, I hope this illustrates the significance of true inclusion as opposed to just, again, bringing a bunch of people together without that sharing.
And I'll throw a couple.
If
you go back, what I think the quote on the dance is exactly the discussion that Vaz brought up between cooperation and collaboration. So I can call it cooperation if I have everybody in the room and they're forced to participate and we say it's done, but that's not the same as collaboration, which is allowing them to be part of the actual decision making. And the studies that I threw on, and maybe should have written a smoother sentence for Dr. Fubara to deal with. Those studies are ones you could never replicate again. They did them in Eastern Europe back kind of in the Cold War time, but they actually took camps of people and made them hate each other. So intentionally on purpose made these groups start disliking each other by doing things to each group, blaming the other side, physically making them dislike each other. And then they did a bunch of studies to exactly this dance. That's what they did. They invited them to group parties, group picnics, group events, and it didn't change it at all. And then what they figured out is if they had a group project, so what they actually did is they had a bus, intentionally had the two groups going to one of these events, had a bus planted there that was broken down, and the two groups had to get out together and help work on it. And they started putting in, so if you think of even as simple as our teams to do our morning blends, our teams to do pumpkin and watermelon carving. Doing things together actually builds relationship. Just being there together does not build relationship. And there's a lot of studies that show that really what Dr. Fubara is talking about is placing it in the room together, not collaborating, not working together towards a challenge and towards a goal is not going to build rapport and culture. And so that's pretty well proven over a long period. So, jump ahead, Antonio.
And of course, that I think ties back to your value of we before me.
Yep. Yes, sir.
So here are some specifics. I've got 8 things that leaders can do to help to build this inclusive culture that we're talking about. And again, jump in and with comments or questions as we go along here. So number 1, invite all voices to actively share their viewpoints. And again, you know, you've heard us say it already that we do better collaboration, we do better problem solving, we have more creativity when we're hearing from people from a variety of different backgrounds. And so again, inviting everyone to participate. Number 2, the best arguments win, not the loudest. And again, I hope I'm kind of assuming that your organization does not really have a culture where the loudest people dominate the conversation. But again, it happens in a lot of organizations where you know, the alpha males, the alpha females, the loudest people in the room often get their way. And obviously, that's not going to be the most effective or efficient way to get things done. Number 3, sometimes it means questioning the dominant perspectives or challenging hierarchical norms. A lot of organizations, again, have the tendency to where certain people always get their way or certain people are always, you know, right. And, you know, kind of everybody looks to that person to finalize the decision, which goes back to what we've been talking about in terms of getting diverse feedback or feedback from multiple people, multiple perspectives. You know, if we keep looking to the 1 or 2 alphas in the room, or in some cases, the bosses, you know, I think obviously hierarchy is important and, you know, respect for authority is important. But I think leaders need to recognize that they don't always have the right answer. They don't always have all the information. I think Chandler said it a few minutes ago. If you don't recognize that you don't know everything, then you're not a very good leader. And so, again, within the boundaries of civility and the norms of the organization, we need to make sure that everybody has a say and that the people, you know, the louder, dominant, or even the senior people in the room do not dominate the conversation. Number 4, continual trust building and maintenance. People, you know, want to know that they can trust their supervisors. You know, there's a saying that people don't quit organizations, they quit managers. And so people want to know that their managers care. In organizational behavior, we talk about trust and the elements that kind of build trust are competence, that the supervisor knows what they're doing, that they are looking out for my best interests, and that they're people of character and integrity. And so those things tend to build trust. And as it says, we ought to maintain or reinforce that trust. So it's not just a one-time thing, but I think our leaders need to continually demonstrate that they are people of competence, character, and benevolence, so that they care about the people in the organization. And then thirdly, number 5, zero tolerance for harassment is part of one of the practices that contributes to an inclusive culture. And I actually read, I think it was one of your newsletters that talked about that last one. So Chandler, you want to add anything to this list or any comments?
Yeah, I mean, we'll kind of close on it. The theme, obviously, for the quarter Antonio shared, there's also in the newsletter and coming out, and Bryson will be leading some of that discussion, is our code of conduct. And so just further driving home how our values play out in our workforce, in our place of business, and our day-to-day operations. And so, the harassment, you got the obvious ones, and then you've got the ones that are a little more challenging. Is if we're going to drive for innovation, drive for excellence, drive for transparent accountability, all that driving can come across pretty heavy. And so if we don't have a good communication discussion, and my argument often is, Dr. Fubara spoke about it right at the onset, what is the purpose? Is the purpose to deliver something we've all agreed upon, deliver a project, deliver a better culture, deliver a better product? It doesn't excuse some kind of hard driving, but it at least says, hey, I know we're driving for the purpose. You're kind of outside the lines. Like so there's the obvious versions of harassment, which are zero tolerance. And then there's just, are you taking the time? Are you being too dominant? Back to the active other viewpoints being involved. And so, but you'll see more to come on that. We'll have it in a morning blend on the code of conduct and that newsletter article Bryson wrote about briefly as well.
Next slide, please. So there's three more items here in terms of how, some specifics for building this culture of inclusion. Number 6, so clear and inclusive communication. We talk about it all the time. Actually, in many of these Leadership Live sessions, there's a point about communication. And it's just that important, to help for people to understand one another. I mean, it's probably very obvious, but you can have the best of intentions, but if it's not clear what you're saying, or if you communicate in an inappropriate way, in a way that is misunderstood, and then again, people can't read your mind. They can't read your intentions if you don't clearly communicate what those intentions are. Number 7, equal rights and opportunities for each employee. And so everybody has the right to speak up. Everybody has the right to participate. Again, that doesn't take away from having job descriptions and hierarchies and so on. But again, everybody has, there's no, I keep saying there's no out group. It's funny because in organizational behavior, that's the idea of in groups and out groups is actually a thing that's kind of accepted as a norm. But I don't think it should be accepted as a norm that there are in groups and out groups. I think everybody should be in the in group. And number 8, appreciating each employee's contributions. So your colleagues may not contribute in the way that you do. They may not have the same sort of perspectives as you have, but that's part of the point, is that people are coming from different perspectives. And so we appreciate your contribution, even though it may be different or unexpected or not what I had in mind, not the way I would contribute. And so again, we want to and we want to express that appreciation as well. So don't just appreciate, but actually express appreciation. Say thank you. Say I appreciate it. And I heard somebody talking earlier about the shout out as an example of that. Giving somebody. Is that something that goes out like in a newsletter or something, some kind of public recognition? It sounds like a great idea.
It does. Goes in newsletters, goes on a board. In our morning blends, whenever someone writes it, we'll pick one off the board in the office, and they'll actually present the shout out in person to the individual, so that we get a shot of dopamine, as most of our team knows, that you get from observing true gratitude being expressed to another person. So multiple ways that's attempted to be done, and hopefully we can continue to make that better every day. So we'll see.
Yeah. And again, it says each employee's contribution. So one of the things we need to be careful is to make sure that everybody who contributes gets appreciated. And then again, there's no in group versus out group. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what does it take to be or to do inclusive leadership? And some of this, we've seen a little of this already, but it's kind of, here we're kind of talking about leader style, leader behavior. So inclusive leadership is shared leadership. It is mentoring rather than bossing. And, I keep saying this, that, people have the role of boss, people have the role of manager, the role of team leader, supervisor, but even in those roles, even if you are, an executive CEO, you don't have to be bossy, even if you are the boss. And so, again, it's it's a slightly nuanced approach. Earlier we read the term servant leadership, and I think that's a reflection of this idea of shared leadership and of leadership that is coaching or mentoring rather than telling people what to do. Secondly, ask about inclusion. Ask about inclusion, well-being, and psychological safety in employee surveys. I don't know if you all do an employee survey of any kind, or I know you do some kind of performance appraisals. You are collecting data about the people in the organization. So that should be part of the data collection. Do people feel a sense of inclusion? Do people feel well-being? Do people feel psychological safety? Again, how do people feel about working here? And as I said earlier, it could be some small things that we can tweak to help people feel more included. Here, I'll give a brief example here from the university, from our perspective. Lately, we've had some budget constraints and cuts and so on. And, they make people nervous. They make people anxious. And so one of the things that our president did was record video and push it out to all the employees in the organization. And it was very, it was a sober video, but it was also informative. It was transparent. It was kind, I would say. And in previous generations of leadership at the university, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but previous presidents would not have said or would not have done that kind of effort to bring us along and to help create a sense of safety and concern for our well-being in a time of challenge here at the university. So I appreciate Dr. Creed for that kind of leadership that demonstrates a concern for our well-being, psychological safety. Thirdly, senior leaders need to be on board, truly on board. And again, at Rosewood, we see, the CEO is here. And so we don't get much more senior than that. In many organizations, this kind of work is delegated, or these concerns are considered, soft. It's not about the numbers. It's not about engineering or operations. So many, or finance. So in many organizations, again, the top leadership doesn't really consider this a priority. Inclusion work. So this next point is very similar to that. Inclusion work should not be assigned exclusively to women and people of color. Once again, in many organizations, that's what happens. So all of the any project, any assignment that has to do with diversity or inclusion or equity goes to women and people of color as the experts on that topic. And obviously, it really should start from the top. And then finally, measure. So use data and allocate budget as necessary. So data collection goes back to what I said earlier about employee surveys, getting input from employees, so you have information that you can use to make good decisions. So one more slide about about leaders. So we talked about some of the specific actions. We talked about some leader behaviors, and then here we have leader characteristics. So the one was what leaders do. Here's what leaders are. So leaders should be humble, aware of their own limitations. And again, if you're not humble, you think you know everything. You think you have all the answers. And so, you're not really going to get input or feedback from anyone else. Leaders need empathy. So being able to put themselves in other people's shoes. You're working with people in your organization from a variety of different backgrounds and upbringings and educational experiences, and again, part of good leadership is recognizing those differences and being and trying to relate to where people are coming from. These next three kind of go together. So cultural intelligence, gender intelligence, generational intelligence. All those three things are just recognizing again that people are different, and because of those differences, they bring certain things to the table that can be very very helpful. So as it says here, leadership looks different in different cultures. Terrence the other day was talking about people. He was talking specifically about communication, and he talked about eye contact as an example. That's a small example, but again, people from different cultures are going to lead in different ways. And generally speaking, those ways are appropriate. They may be different, they may be unusual, they may be unfamiliar, but appropriate nonetheless. And so again, good leaders should educate themselves on how people from different cultures lead, on how women lead versus men. It often is different. Again, that's not to stereotype. That's not to sort of put people in, pigeonhole people. But it is true that often women lead more collaboratively, more cooperatively than men. Often, again, it's a generalization, not a stereotype, and so we should be aware of it. And then, the generational differences I think are just fascinating because next year I turned 60. So, I'm officially an old man. And, so a lot of the people that I work around are much younger than that. I'm looking at you, Antonio. And so with the difference in generation, there are differences in leadership style and work style and communication style, collaboration style. Again, they have to be sort of filtered into what's acceptable within the boundaries of our organization, but they're not necessarily wrong. The way that my students approach ideas, the way they communicate, may be different from the way that I do, but it's not wrong. For the most part, it's not wrong. And so I need to develop an appreciation and an understanding, and again, to take advantage of those differences and use them for our mutual benefit. And then lastly, being conscious. So the last of the leader characteristics, leaders should be conscious and aware of their own unconscious biases. Everybody has biases. Everybody has preferences. And if you are in a leadership role, again, whether it's formal or informal, we need to be very careful not to let those personal biases and perspectives and preferences get in the way. So, and we could make a long list of what those might be. But, whatever they are, political, your favorite football team, where you went to school, whatever it might be, everybody has, again, their biases and preferences. And we need to make sure that they don't operate in a dysfunctional way or harmful way or a way that excludes people in the organization.
I'll jump in on that a little bit if I can there, Dr. Fubara. The obvious conundrum is be conscious of something that's unconscious. The second big thing is this is one of the political footballs that unfortunately has become such a hot topic item. And as someone who has studied since literally the 1990s, I guess, a lot on psychology of influence, which is built all on pretty much precognition, things you have either learned through nature. There are a ton of things that we automatically, they call them click whirl, they call them click runs. There's a few other things that you just do. A lot of them are actually beneficial. And so I'll give an example that's not a controversial area of bias, but the rule of consistency and commitment is one that's studied a lot. And in general, that's a great thing. We all talk about our employees. We want them to be consistent. We want them to be committed to what they said they were going to do. What you really do is you don't become conscious of the unconscious bias. You build a habit of kind of a second layer question of, hey, am I doing this just because it's consistent and because that's what I've already said, or have I taken another perspective into account? And so when we bought the original company's assets to start Advantage out of bankruptcy, I was telling Dr. Fubara this story. What do you think they told a 29-year-old lawyer coming in to do store setups and blue collar work? Well, I don't want to do any of that. This is the way we've always done it. And me being a little bit more sarcastic than I am, or a lot more than I usually show on these calls, I said, well, you're in bankruptcy. So you responding to me that that's the way you've always done it is not a very intelligent response. I give that example because that is how strong some of the things that are good in the general sense, like they're good for society. It's obviously good for building a community. It's good as an employee to have a committed, consistent employee. If you don't build in a mechanism to go, hey, wait a minute, am I taking other perspectives? Do I really want to make this decision? Is this wise? Then your general click run tendencies can get you in a lot of trouble. And so Robert Cialdini is the foremost at studying psychology of influence, I would argue, has written several versions of the books of really the 7 areas that these pop up. One of them being in the newer one is sort of tribe, is the way I would call it, but it's social group. And what Dr. Fabar brought up is that group forms in a ton of different ways. And it's really interesting now as technology, certainly we see the divide in the culture of, clicks and algorithms pushing you down to buy stuff to make you radicalize and split groups up. So it is a hot button issue, but it exists. There's a lot of study on it. The hard thing to differentiate is what are the defenses? And so I have a paper which we can make available that I put together with Scott for our Helmwise that kind of breaks down those psychology of influence, but also has some defenses into am I following this because I like the person? Is the person in authority? Do they match my group? Those things we do automatically all the time. And then to Dr. Fabara's point, when you have groups that don't feel included and you've made that move, your best intent makes no difference. They read it how they read it. If you're not communicating, considering perspectives, then you're going to isolate groups and make them not part of the in group.
Yeah, thank you. That's next slide. I think this is the end, I think. Yeah, so just to, Chandler just mentioned hot button issues, the politically charged environment. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, when we talk about the very word inclusion, right? And people start thinking about often some really political, polarized kind of issues. And hopefully you've seen from what we've talked about that that's not what we're talking about today. Even that second point there, that diversity is associated with extreme wokeness. That's just part of the culture that we're in today. And again, I hope that you can see the distinction between some of the caricatures of what DEI is about and some of the ideas in the political sphere that are often, as Chandler mentioned, that oftentimes people are getting reinforced in these sort of, falling into rabbit holes that are not healthy or, again, extremely polarized. And, as I said, I hope that you can see that the ideas that we've been talking about here are valuable, not just from in a workplace setting, but I think in our personal lives as well. Being open to multiple perspectives, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, communicating clearly and inclusively, operating in humility. Again, all the things we've been talking about for the last 50 minutes or so, I think are valuable in our whole lives, neighborhood, church, family, and not just in the business context, and are useful ways of being wherever we operate. So I think that's my last word. Anybody Antonio, let me see the next slide. I think that was the last slide, though. So we've got a couple more minutes. If people want to add additional comments or final thoughts on this, are there ways, suggestions, input, and insight that you can provide? Or comments or questions? We could.
Yeah, Dr. Fubara, I got a question. I've been struggling with this during the entire presentation, and maybe this is a unconscious, conscious thing, right? But we talk a lot about inclusion, and we talk about the environment, and I think that's where it comes. It's creating the environment where everyone feels included. But when you were talking about the sort of the dance metaphor, one thing's being invited to the event, the other thing is being invited to dance. It gave me this feeling that it's always someone else's responsibility, right, to ensure that I'm included. And it really kind of advocates the personal responsibility to inject themselves, to step in, to offer that opinion. It's they need to be asked. So it's always someone else's responsibility to draw me into the equation instead of me taking personal ownership that I need to contribute. So any words on how I can blend those two things together? Because one feels very passive, the other feels active, and it feels like we always want to blame someone else because I'm not included.
Wow. So yeah, I think you kind of captured it there, that it's both and. So when we're talking, so primarily, I think this conversation is about leadership and leaders taking the initiative to reach out to followers. So in that sense, it is our focus in this discussion was largely on, again, the leaders taking the lead role in generating or creating inclusion. Part of it's going to depend on the organizational context and environment. So hopefully you're creating an environment. I think again, for Rosewood, it's pretty obvious. It's an environment where people can speak up. There are some contexts and cultures where people don't feel like they can speak up. And so, it makes it more difficult for people to take that initiative. But I do agree with you that I think people should take that initiative. People should speak up. I mean, we've said in many different contexts that leadership is not just for bosses, that everybody should be taking on leadership. And so being able to speak up from wherever you are in the organizational hierarchy, I think is consistent with that notion of everyone as a leader. So thanks for bringing that up, Scott. I think that is important that, everyone should be able to take initiative. And hopefully the environment is a place where people feel comfortable doing that. As I said, there's some places where that's not true.
I would say, even though Scott's kind of feels a little like there's the big question, is that what we're saying is when you try to collaborate properly in our environment, and like I said, get the best possible answer, spirit of excellence, there are, again, the prisms and perspectives that you don't have and I don't have. I think Scott's question is, even if I set that up the best, if the person who has a perspective I'm unaware of doesn't insert what I'm unaware of, then it'll continue to be not part of the group. And so I think that, even with the best intent, and again, I think it goes with the humility that was at the beginning and the start of this, with the values came up. We screw this up all the time. But we want a culture. We want people to be involved. We want to come up with where can we do better. And so, I was excited at the topic. I don't like the fact that it's been co-opted and politicized and moved into many realms. Dr. Fubara can tell you we've done scholarships and things and other groups that we've done work with well prior to it becoming, it's good the light was put on some of it. It's bad that it became a football for politics and a weapon. And so we're not going to shy away from it, because we do want we before me. We do want a culture of excellence and a culture where everyone brings something to the table that produces excellence for the product, the service. To Kevin's point, that creates profitability, jobs, promotions. One of the best ways to expand your life is move up and unfortunately have a little more monetary and leadership position. And so that's a good way to get part of the group. So I'll close on that. Dr. Fubara, if you want to take us home, you can wrap it for us, but I certainly appreciate you jumping on the topic and giving us some education on it and letting me jump in and voice my thoughts as well.
So you're the CEO. I didn't let you. I didn't let you in. But thank you guys. That was just a joke, everybody. That was just playing. Thanks, everybody. This has been a helpful discussion for me too. So I think it's it's been quite valuable. I was going to say something else. Oh, Chandler was talking about situations where the leaders are trying to open up opportunities for people to provide input, and people are not speaking up. But I hope that this very conversation, the fact that we're having this conversation, helps to reinforce the notion that the leaders of this organization are open to your input. They want to hear from you and want to create this culture where everybody is free to contribute to the fullest. As I said at the beginning, that's a win-win-win situation. It's good for customers, good for the organization, and good for the individuals as well. So once again, thank you guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barr.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the
Thank you.
October Leadership Live.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Yeah.
Thank
Antonio.
you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.